My friend Sally has had a bad run-in with neighbors, but this one was the worst. Sally lives very close to me, about a 10-minute walk. We were both around 14 when this happened. We live in a rural area, so we both have a lot of land. So, with nothing else to do, Sally and I decided to go camping on her land. We bought cheap hammocks and went through the bushland. The days prior, we spent clearing some of the razor grass with a cane knife to make a path. We probably should have worn long pants because we ended up with little cuts all over our legs and some on our arms. We set up a few hammocks then, brought quite a few blankets because it was getting pretty cold at night, even though we were sweating throughout the day. We were still on our property and hadn't gone to her neighbor's boundary. Her neighbor had just leased the land to some new tenants. Sally and I were sitting in our hammocks talking and laughing, and it was around 9 p.m. We heard something in the bush. We just thought that it was a wallaby. There are plenty of wallabies around here. But then we could see a figure of a man. We were whispering to each other, trying to see who it was. At first, we thought that it was her brother. He had come out and scared us when we were camping previously. But then as the person got closer, we were thinking that it could have been her dad. It was dark and the bush looks the same from every angle. We realized the man was coming from the other direction that wasn't from our house. We didn't dare move and covered our torches under our blankets. The man came up and said hi and introduced himself as Ben. Now Ben was extremely drunk and he staggered around and he reeked of alcohol. He started saying how we had a nice little camp here and said something pretty unsettling. I'll have to come out and sunbake naked here on one of these hammocks. Me and Sally gave each other worried looks but didn't say anything. It only got worse from here. I can't remember everything he said because it was a while ago, and he was mumbling on for what felt like forever. But some of the things just stuck out. I'll have to kill you, Wolf Creek style. And he said, you're nearly legal then, when he asked about our age. Ben was probably in his 40s. Sally and I were texting each other while he was talking and coming up with an escape plan. He also offered us a puff on the magic dragon and pulled out a glass pipe. We declined. Sally said that we were leaving back to our house to make food. He told us to come back. We left our blankets and most of our stuff there and we liked it. We told her dad what had happened and we slept inside. The next morning, we went back to our campsite to find everything burnt. A circle with probably about a 20-meter radius was all burnt. And coming from that circle was a line of burnt grass, going towards the neighbor's house. Now, I'm not a firefighter or do forensics, but it seemed obvious that some kind of fuel was used. Sally and I were talking and it dawned on us the possibility that Ben may have thought that we were in the hammocks due to the pile of blankets. Ben was definitely drunk enough not to be able to tell the difference. We went and told Sally's dad, who then checked it out and then went next door. Ben's roommate answered the door and said that Ben wasn't home and apologized, and even gave Sally's dad $50 for the blankets and hammocks. Nothing more happened for a few months. Sally told me at school about how Ben had been caught on camera sneaking around her yard. I went to her house after school because she was going to be home alone until her dad finished work. I ended up sleeping over there that night, and that's when he came over. Ben was drunk and came out the front of Sally's house and started yelling that he had accused Sally of stealing his dog. Sally's dad called the police, and they arrested him. The next day, we found a knife in the yard, and it wasn't from Sally's house. The police came again and we told them about the knife and they got the footage from the cameras as well. I don't know what happened to Ben, but he no longer lives next to Sally. Okay, so this happened when I was around 9 years old. I'm 25 now. and it's something that I will never forget. It gives me goosebumps to this day. I live in a terraced house, it's 4 houses combined, and my neighbors and I each have our own little patio. There's a small road 10 meters from my yard where people do their Sunday walks and so on. Only a small fence separates my small yard and patio from that road. I live in a pretty crowded area, with several of those terraced houses spread across to my neighborhood, so seeing people walking on that road is pretty normal for me. Seeing random people standing on my patio is not. When I was 9, I usually got home from school about an hour before my mom got home from work. I live maybe 10 meters away from school, so my mom figured I was mature enough to be home alone for around an hour before she got home. This one day that I got home from school, I did the usual thing, which was to make sure I locked the front door and double-check that the back door leading to the patio was also locked. I was 9. Being alone was a little scary, even though it was in the middle of the day and only for an hour. I then would rush to my room upstairs to play as much PlayStation as possible, before my mom came home and made me do homework. While playing, I heard this noise coming from outside my window. My room was located 1 floor above the patio, with a view to the road that I told you about before. It was kind of like the sound of a cat, but my cat had been missing for over 3 months. Hope sparked and I thought, did she finally come back? I ran downstairs to check if it was my cat, but the sight that met me gives me goosebumps just writing this. There's a guy standing on my patio, a tall guy with black hair covering half of his eyes, making him look like a male version of the Ring woman or something. I could hear him making high-pitched sounds, almost like a cat meowing. A brown liquid was running down from his mouth, and I could see him spitting out my dad's stopped cigarettes. He was actually eating from the ashtray. I was frozen observing this. Eventually snapped out of it and screamed so loud that the man must have heard it. He didn't react. He kept on eating from the ashtray. I ran upstairs to my room, locked the door, and called my mom, who then called the cops. I've never been more terrified in my life. Laying in bed under my sheets, shivering with fear, as I hear these creepy, high-pitched noises from the guy eating cigarette stumps from the ashtray on my patio. I kind of blacked out for a moment, because the next thing I remember is the police arriving on the road by my yard. I hear them talking to the guy saying stuff like, "What are you doing? Get over here, or we'll come down and arrest you," and so on. He didn't respond, but the high-pitched sounds were more frequent and louder. I decided to look through the window, feeling safe now that the cops were there. I could see 2 police officers standing by my fence, 1 man and a woman. I did not see the creepy man, however, because he was standing directly 1 story under me and out of my field of view. The police jumped the fence, and I remember hearing the creepy guy screaming louder than anything I'd ever heard before. He charged the female police officer with full force, and he knocked her out cold. The male officer then immediately tased the guy, leaving him shaking on the ground, screaming still. The policeman struggled to keep him on the ground while putting handcuffs on him, but eventually he made it. After a while, he had managed to wake up the female officer, who seemed to be badly hurt. He called for backup in an ambulance, and then he sees me standing in the window above him. The expression on my face must have been something else, because he just looked at me and said, "I sure as hell hope you didn't see all that." And I started to cry. By this time, neighbors started to arrive wondering what the hell was going on. One of my neighbors, an elderly woman, made me come down and she took care of me until my mom came back home. The police took the creepy guy with them in the car and they eventually left. Before they left, they promised to come back and talk to us about what had happened. This is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The male police officer came back later that night and sat down with me and my mom to talk. He explained that the guy on my patio was actually diagnosed with severe autism. He had escaped a facility where mentally challenged people live, located around 5 kilometers from where I live. He explained that the guy had actually been living in my house 5 years ago, but he had been forced to move when his mom, his only caretaker, had died. The poor guy probably thought he would find his mom at my house. He missed the routines and he missed living there with his mom. The police had to move him from the house that time 5 years ago because he was extremely strong. From what I heard, he had extreme tensions in the body because of the autism, making his muscles grow stronger and stronger throughout the years. This was the reason he had reacted the way he did when the police came this day. Still frightened, I told the police officer that he needed to make sure this would never happen again, and he promised that it wouldn't. After a few sleepless nights, my life got back to normal. The years went by and the guy didn't come back, until 1 year ago. At this time, my mom and dad had moved out and I had bought the house from them, and I'm still living there today. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the patio when I see this random guy stopping on the road by my fence. He just stands there looking at me. I look at him and I give him a nod. And then I hear the high-pitched noises. Holy crap, it's him. His hair had turned gray, but the high-pitched noises made me realize. My heart started racing and I instantly remembered the reason why he was back. I realized that he must have managed to get out again. Because I kept my cool a bit longer than when I was 9, I started to realize how sorry I felt for the guy. 16 years later and he was back to look for his mom. I decided to carefully ask him if he wanted to come down to the patio. He instantly jumped the fence. I started to think that he would knock me out like he did to that police officer. He didn't. He smiled and he looked at me and smiled. I offered him to sit down. He didn't respond. I offered him to come inside. He started laughing. We went inside and his face lit up with pure joy. He was home. It reminded him of the life he had with his mom. It almost made me tear up. All of a sudden, he sat down on my couch, turned on my TV, and switched directly to the cartoons. I observed him for a while. He was just completely focused on the cartoons. I just wanted him to enjoy the moment, so I didn't say anything to him. But I realized that I had to call the facility to let them know, and the caretakers arrived 10 minutes later. After a lot of convincing, he got back up crying, and they went back to the facility. I called the facility 2 days later, and we made a deal. His name is Tom, and I now consider Tom my friend. Every Sunday from the day that he returned, Tom and his caretakers visit me to watch cartoons. They say that it's the highlight of his week, and it makes my heart warm. Now, for several years, my thoughts were, let's not meet. Guy on my patio eating from the ashtray. But now my thoughts are, let's meet every Sunday to watch cartoons. My friend Tom. Several years ago, when I was 25, I lived with, at the time, one of my best friends. Our friendship eventually started to dwindle, as it usually goes when you move in with a good friend, so she was rarely home. This night, however, she ended up staying at her place, heading to bed early. I was a server at the time, so I stayed up pretty late, usually watching YouTube and smoking pot. This night was no different than any other, except for the fact that my neighbors had tried to kidnap me. I'll go ahead and give some background info on my house and my neighbors. We lived in a 3-bedroom house with 2 bedrooms and the kitchen facing the crazy neighbors. They were a younger couple living in a smaller mill house. They were constantly coming out to our door asking for handouts. Now normally, I would be happy to help out a neighbor, but they would come over and ask for crazy stuff, like us to fill up an old Mountain Dew bottle with water, because theirs got shut off, beer, and once literally to ask for a single $1. They would constantly be knocking at our door to ask for help, and when we wouldn't answer, I'd peek through the window to see them either jacking cigarette butts from the ashtray or pressing their eyeballs against the door people to see if they could spot us. Anyway, there I was smoking some weed and watching YouTube on my couch when I heard a knock at the door. I rolled my eyes because I knew exactly who was knocking. It was 11 p.m. I checked the people and sure enough, the boyfriend was on my porch. Normally, I would just walk away and continue with my life, but he looked like he was in distress. I opened the door up to see what was up. Hey, I just wanted to come over here and see if you would film my engagement. I got my girlfriend a ring here in my pocket and I need you to follow me to my backyard and film it for me. Baffled but curious, I told him congrats and that I would be out in a second. I just needed to put shoes on. I shut the door behind me and locked it. And quickly, I ran to the back room that looked out into the backyard. I peeked through the blinds to see the setup. Nothing. Pitch black darkness. No signs of decorations or anything like that. Naturally, I woke my roommate up and told her what was going on. Yeah, forget that, she said to me, and we both walked back up to the door after the boyfriend had started banging on it. I looked through the people again. I couldn't see anything and was confused all the way up until he pulled his eyeball away from the people. I quickly turned around and put my back up against the door. My roommate came running back to the door from her room, manning 2 wire hangers for protection. We both clung onto the hangers and sat up against the door until he finally left. We were so freaked out, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't overreacting. We went out to our back door and hopped into her car so we could do a drive-by. And they always had their front door open and also didn't have any blinds, so it was easy to see inside of their house. Slowly, we crept by in her car and peered into the living room. Sitting on the couch and all staring at the wall, they looked strung out. It was the couple and an older man. We sped off and ended up staying at a friend's house that night. I never answered the door for either of them again. One day I came home from work and an older lady was parked in their driveway. She walked up to me and got out of the car and asked if I knew where the neighbors were. I told her that I hadn't seen them for a while and she informed me that she was the owner. She told me that they were months late on rent and finally came to evict them. She entered the home to find it completely trashed, needles and garbage everywhere, holes in the wall, and literal crap on the floor. I told her that I was sorry to hear that she had to deal with all that, but I was happy that they were finally gone. I'm not 100% sure what was going on that night, but I'm glad I didn't follow him into the backyard. It was an early summer morning and the sun was up, but few people were out. In fact, these streets were practically dead that morning. My mom decided to take my sister, only 1-year-old at the time, seated in a stroller, and I, to throw away some garbage at the garbage station. I might add that the garbage station is kind of secluded from nearby houses, bordering one of those deep, dark forests of eastern Sweden. Since I was only 4 when this happened, the memories from the incident had faded a lot. However, my mom remembers all of it. She says that upon entering the station, she immediately got an eerie feeling of being watched. I remember that feeling too. I felt creeped out, even though I didn't know why I was scared. I guess I could sense my mom's fear. Walking along that secluded garbage station, my mom suddenly stopped and told me this. Hold onto the stroller as hard as you can and don't let go, no matter what. That's my most vivid memory I have of this, and I don't think I'll ever forget those words. I'll at least never forget how they made me feel. It was as if my blood had turned to ice. I just froze. My mom sounded stern, but even a toddler can sense when someone's scared out of their mind. My mom was definitely afraid of something. The rest is just a blur. I don't remember much apart from the aforementioned, so I'll let the rest of the story be told from the perspective of my mother. This is the recollection of her experience, recalled to the best of my abilities, but in my own words. Not far from where we were standing, a truck was parked with a man seated in the front. Nothing unusual. A lot of truck drivers stop to rest by the side of the road. But this man was staring, and he wouldn't stop staring. He stared right at me, examining my body with the determined gaze of a predator. Gluing the three of us in his sight, he truly seemed pleased by the fear he had instilled on our faces. And his eyes, they were something else, almost as if they didn't belong to a human, but rather to a predator on the savannah. I felt like prey, stuck in the claws of a lion, and I couldn't move. And that's when he smiled at me. I remember that dead smile, those cold, calculating eyes, and the way that he licked his lips, almost as if to say, I could kill you all if I wanted to. I believed this was the point in time, into this strange encounter, when my mom told me to hold on to the stroller, to hold on tightly and not let go. My mom is a small woman, 160 centimeters, weighing only about 48 kilograms, and she could easily have been overpowered by the overweight man in the truck. My mom later admitted she was afraid he would jump out of the truck and knock her out, possibly assaulting her, or even taking me and my younger sister. We bolted out of there. We didn't throw away much garbage that morning. We just turned around and walked home as quickly as my mom could do with a stroller and a 4-year-old toddler at her side. We never talked about what happened that day, up until very recently. The incident has always lingered somewhere in the back of my mind, as that weird thing that happened when I was a kid. And every time I walk past that garbage station, I get a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. As previously mentioned, this happened around 2006. Fast forward to 2008. The face of a 10-year-old little girl called Engla was printed across the front page of every newspaper in sight. She had been kidnapped and murdered, and the perpetrator was an overweight truck driver named Anders Öcklund, now known as one of Sweden's most infamous killers. Anders Öcklund was charged with the murder of Engla, alongside the murder of a woman named Pernilla. And he's also suspected of abducting another little girl who's still currently missing, making him more than one thing. And my mom says that when she saw Öcklund's picture in the paper, when she saw those cold, familiar eyes, she knew that he was the creepy man from the garbage station that early morning all those years ago. Thinking how my mom or my sister or me, or all of us could have been his victims, that sends chills up my spine. Anders, even though you're behind bars, let's never meet again. I recently moved into an apartment close to my workplace in the city. It's a garden-level apartment that faces a parking garage for the city's education department, and a patio-like section of foliage, trees, and leaves. Connected to this patio is the alleyway. I've been living here for 2 months, and the apartment itself is pretty quiet. Most of the tenants are just normal blue-collar folk, and grad students and hipsters basically. Nothing crazy or weird living here. A needle exchange opened up basically across the alleyway this summer and has attracted unsavory characters. In the US, needle exchanges are extremely controversial and are only allowed in several states. Many of them have been hanging around the back of the alleyway and pooping and peeing out there. The leasing office and landlord of the building is trying to get the city to help with this problem. My first encounter with these peeping druggy toms was one Saturday morning. I awoke to hear all this moaning and groaning from outside the patio tree area. When I opened my eyes and peeped outside, I saw a guy completely high on something, sharpening sticks right outside of my window. I was super scared but didn't know if he saw me because I quickly hid under my kitchen table and called non-emergency police. And they sent someone out to investigate like 30 minutes later. And when the cop car appeared, he moaned out and walked away from the scene before they got to the patio area. The second time was me sleeping the night before work. It was literally the night of my birthday. I heard pounding at my window at around 11 p.m. and I awoke to it. I had my window slightly cracked open to let cool air in. I don't have air conditioning. And I heard the sound of rap music coming from either a small speaker or a phone. I originally thought the pounding was from my neighbor or upstairs, but then I realized that the pounding was coming from the window behind me. It got worse and worse with accompanying moaning and blaring rap music. I called the non-emergency police and they told me they would send someone out in to take a look. And this continued for another 15 minutes and I had to go to the bathroom desperately. I couldn't just sit there and hide in my bed. I crawled to my kitchen, got a knife and went to the bathroom. I figured the burglar bars on my apartment window would deter the pounding. The pounding stopped when I came out of the bathroom. It got almost too quiet. Something about the vibes, the feeling just didn't feel right. I decided, I don't know why still, to peek through the blind slats and I shined my phone flashlight through them. What I saw was the guy's face staring right through me in the blinds. It was horrific. The pupils were completely dilated like a cat, almost, and he could see me and the knife. He pounded right back at me through the burglar blinds and screamed, "I'm going to kill you." I don't know what he was on, but he was extremely aggressive and he seemed invincible to it. I got so scared and was in a ton of shock that I shut the crack while he was continuing to pound and turned up his rap music. I ended up crawling back down to my low-lying bed and calling the police. What ended up happening was the cops came once again, about 30 minutes later or so. When they came, I heard the guy moaning in alarm and I saw him running off as I peeked through the blinds on a BMX bicycle. When I talked to the cops, they were more concerned about how he looked like than what he did, and seemed overall unconcerned and not very reassuring. I ended up missing work, not getting much sleep, and having to spend half the day recuperating during my birthday. My solution now was shutting the blinds tighter and closing the window at night, and trying to use the cooler and fans before nightfall. I'm also thinking about getting curtains to pull over the blinds, but overall I feel like this is challenging due to the heat and not having AC. I want to stay cool and the night breeze really helps, but it's tricky because there are creeps outside. When I told my boss that I wasn't coming into work the following day, he recommended that I seek a room at a higher ground. I don't know if that will help, and possibly it could be more dangerous, since there are no burglar bars on the first floor and above, while my garden level does and really is what saved my butt from that guy bursting in and wanting to kill me. I'm an extremely frightened chick from this experience and I've gotten more paranoid since. My boyfriend has been really kind this past weekend. This happened on a Thursday night, and offered to stay over more. Since then, it's been quiet, but I heard someone last night yelling outside so loud that I could hear it through the shut window. I feel like the cops have not been helpful and they don't take this seriously. In college, there was an adult student I knew who participated in some of the meetings hosted by a scholarship program that I was in. He was a very well-known musician on campus. I didn't know him well, but we were acquaintances. We were friendly on campus, and I think one time he came by my apartment and a large group of people to have some drinks. He seemed quirky, but nothing about him seemed wrong or bad. until I ran into him at a 24/7 grocery store just off campus one Saturday night. I was there with my boyfriend and some friends, and since we were friendly, I said hi and asked him how he was. He was drunk, very, very drunk. As we're talking, he breaks down, professing how much and how long he had been interested in me, and saying how inappropriate it was since I was in a relationship, and he repeated this for about 20 minutes. He also talked about problems in his family. This happened about 3 years ago, so I don't remember all the details, but I'm pretty sure one family member had killed another, and other sorts of crazy stuff. I was a little stunned into silence about all of this, because having a drunk man crying and professing an interest in me in a grocery store around midnight was not what I expected when I said hi to a guy that I barely knew. But nonetheless, I stood there and was supportive. I told him that he was right. I was in a relationship, so there wasn't a chance for him, and mostly just nodded along and told him that he was a good human being and shouldn't be hard on himself. But then it got weird. He told me that one night he came by my apartment. He found the door unlocked, so he had walked inside. He wanted to see me, to come into my room, but he couldn't remember which of the 3 bedrooms was mine. He stood in the common space for a little while, but decided to leave instead of guessing at the doors. He told me that it was probably a good thing that he couldn't remember which room was mine, because he really wanted to be with me that night, and if he had remembered which room was mine, he would have come in. And if he came in, he doesn't think he would have been able to stop himself and would have forced himself on me. That was his description. At some point in the conversation, although I don't recall if it was before or after his confession of coming into my home, he leaned in to kiss me. I turned so he only got my cheek. I was so stunned through all of this that I didn't know how to leave. My boyfriend at the time saw him try to kiss me, and initially got upset about it and walked away. I think he did eventually come back and rescue me from that conversation. The next day, I got a message from him on Facebook. I have cut out some filler, but the message is still there. Wow, I can't believe what happened last night. I was crying. There is something about you that I love, but I hold back in fear of a broken heart. All the things I said that night were true. I would love to hang out with you, but I know I would want to touch you, and again, you have a boyfriend. That wouldn't be fair to either of us. Sorry for all the misspelled words. I don't care about that. As you know, I'm a music guy, so words don't mean that much, and it's funny if I misspell them. I'm going to stop typing now. Take care. Peace, love, respect, always. Respect that he may come into my bedroom while I'm asleep and force himself on me. I talked to a staff member in my scholarship program to explain that I didn't feel safe around this guy, and to please help that there wouldn't be any situations where the 2 of us were alone together. And up until last week, I haven't thought about him in over 2 years. But last week, he sent me a message wishing me a happy birthday. I was kind of shocked that I hadn't removed him as a friend on Facebook considering how creepy he is. So today, I went to remove him. Turns out I had. Over 2 years ago, around the time that I graduated. When you're not friends, you don't get reminders of people's birthdays, so he had to have memorized it. He's blocked now. So please, let's never meet again. In my bedroom, in my home, in a grocery store, or anywhere else. It was New Year's Eve, my birthday, and myself and 2 of my friends were out in the front of my house listening to music on my iPod. We were about 12 at the time, and there was no one else around. It was probably 10 or 10:30 at night, and we were waiting for the illegal fireworks to light up down the street. It happened every year at this time. It probably sounds a little weird. 12-year-old kids by themselves at 10:30 p.m. listening to Katy Perry in the middle of the street. But it wasn't too unusual. See, my neighborhood is very close and we all know all of our neighbors really well. So our parents who were in the house and ourselves weren't at all concerned. We were listening to Hot and Cold by Katy Perry. Yes, it was that time of the decade, and we were jamming along to it when we began to hear a whistle. Now, first off, it sounded like it was part of the song, so initially everyone ignored it. But that was until it started to distort and go out of rhythm to the music playing. It didn't seem to be in tune with the song, and it was eerily out of pitch. I don't know why, maybe to hear it better, but my friend decided to pause the music. Maybe it was just in the song, or maybe the phone was glitching. As soon as the music stopped, the whistling continued, pitchy and slow. We were all a little bit spooked and it was dark outside, other than the few streetlights on the road. We couldn't really see much or make out much of the darkness other than the strange whistling. We were able to pinpoint the direction it was coming from soon enough. We turned towards it and froze. About 10 meters from where we stood, just on the edge of the street lamp's light, was a man. He looked quite disheveled, most likely homeless, and he was just standing there, looking at us, whistling that godforsaken, pitchy whistle. We were all frozen for a while, as I guess we were caught off guard, until my fight or flight kicked in. I yelled at my friends to get inside and they began to scream and run up the driveway. I pushed and shoved them forward, terrified because I don't know whether they could hear what I was hearing. But the whistling had finally stopped. But something else was drowning out the silence. Heavy-setted footsteps. He was chasing after us. I screamed bloody murder at them, opening the front door and shoving them inside, not caring if I hurt them. I turned and slammed the deadbolt just as he had reached the screen door. I watched as his figure came into view. He was dirty, wearing soiled long-sleeve clothing, had an unkempt beard and wore a torn beanie. As I closed the door, he stopped just ahead of the screen, looked me dead in the eye, and murmured something that still makes my skin crawl. Damn it. One of my friends consoled the other, who was now in tears, as I watched him through the peephole. He lingered for a second more and then disappeared into the blackness. I remember my friends grabbing me, asking if I was okay, and then pointing down to my hands. I was shaking like a leaf. We never told our parents. That was over 10 years ago, and it still gives me the heebie-jeebies to think what would have happened if we hadn't noticed the out-of-place whistling. This happened to me when I was a kid, and it is probably one of the creepiest stories I have to tell. I think I was about 9 or 10 when this happened. It was definitely my birthday because we had the party at a nearby park. I think that it had been raining, but I was still excited that it was my birthday. We all had a good time, and me and my brother opened our presents and ate our cake. The only day kids loved as much as their birthday is Christmas, and I was really happy with all the presents that my friends had gotten me. By the time the party was over, it had stopped raining, and the sun was starting to come out. We picked up everything and put the presents in the car, and then we started to drive back home. The exit to the rather large park that we had been at goes through this big fancy metal gate and opens out to a circular intersection. We pulled into the intersection and took a left turn towards the state highway. This might be important later. Everything seemed normal at first, until we stopped at a crosswalk down the road from my street. I noticed my dad looking into the rearview mirror, and he muttered something to my mom. We kept driving and turned down my street and then into my driveway. I unbuckled and turned around to see what was the matter. I watched as my dad walked to a red car, maybe a sedan or a Prius, and spoke to the lady driving it. We all watched as she sped away. I remember getting really scared, and my mom brought me and my brothers inside while my dad had called the cops. An officer arrived at our house shortly, and my dad told me what had happened. Apparently, when we had stopped at the crosswalk, he noticed the lady in the car behind ours filming us. He watched to see if she followed us, and when she did, of course. When we got home and he approached her, all she said was, "I got what I wanted." The officer assured us that a lot of people like to film these stuff around them, as this was the time when cameras like GoPros were becoming popular. To this day, I'm still not sure why exactly that lady filmed us. Maybe we had cut her off at the intersection, or she didn't notice us stopping at the light ahead, braking just in time to prevent a fender bender, or blaming it on us. We never really heard anything of her again. But I know this sounds cheesy, but it's the truth. I sometimes wonder if she'll come back. So, to the creepy lady who filmed my family on my birthday, let's not meet. I was about 7 years old, my brother about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mom woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was often just the three of us at the house for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left put you in the middle of a hallway. And taking another left led down that hallway to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from our upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway are windowed doors we always kept locked and rarely used. The door on my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened to our back porch. The house kind of leans into a small hill. My brother and mom both had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only knew this because I was always a light sleeper, and they just couldn't help flushing with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. I'm gonna try to pee before I go to bed. The past few nights I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway. I don't know if my mom wrote it off as my brother telling ghost stories to try and scare me, or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it. But she didn't react at all to my brother's confession. I, on the other hand, was terrified by it. The fear of seeing a ghost like that at the end of the hallway or through the windows is the reason I started running from the stairs to my bedroom at night. Years later, when I was about 18, my mom and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog that we had for a very short time when I was little. We were sharing stories about Max's tendency towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviors when my mom blurted out, "Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food that we had?" This really caught me by surprise because in all the years that I lived in that house, we never once called the cops. I asked her what she was talking about, and she looked equally surprised, as if she had just revealed something by accident. "Oh, that's right, I never told you because you were too young at the time. One night, I woke up hearing noises outside my window, and when I looked, I saw a man staring into my bedroom." She went on to describe how turning on the lights caused him to take off running, and how she grabbed my dad's pistol before calling the cops. I can't remember all the details I gave them when they showed up. A tall white male wearing a striped shirt and jeans, short dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man that they were looking for in the area. It turns out that he had escaped from jail on a murder charge. Now, I know it sounds so obvious hearing those two stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago in my mid-20s that I pieced together that my brother had unknowingly warned us about a murderer who spent multiple nights casing our home.